Hello and welcome to another episode of Judge of Character. As always, I'm your host, Steve. Well, folks, after the last couple of months of dark and doom, I thought it'd be a good idea if we did something a little bit more lighthearted. And what could be more lighthearted than Disney? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to be doing a top 10 countdown of my personal favorite Disney movies. Now, having said that, remember folks, this is just my personal favorite list, and it's a matter of opinion. So if you don't agree with everything I say on here, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. After all, that's the whole point of having an opinion. If you disagree with me, okay. In any case, if you do disagree with me, leave a comment saying what you would have picked for your top spots and why. I always love seeing those sort of responses. It makes for an interesting conversation. In any case, let's not waste any more time and get right into the countdown. Here's number 10.
Number 10. Frozen. What better way to start things off than with a movie that felt like a return to the Renaissance?
Now, when I say Renaissance, I'm referring to the Renaissance age of animation, a period of time that was mostly during the 90s in which animation showed that it was more than capable of delivering high-quality stories that anybody could enjoy. It was a period of time in which animation had gained a whole new level of acceptance, relevance, and respect that it hadn't seen in years.
It was during this period of time that Disney produced many of its more recent hits, many of which are included on this list. It's also the period of time in which many of my generation were growing up and were subsequently exposed to Disney.
But alas, the Renaissance would not be forever. Towards the end of the 90s, due to a series of mistakes, many of them made by Disney itself, we were left with animation that just, shall we say, left a lot to be desired.
Which leads me to why Frozen is at the number 10 spot on my list. The last few movies released by Disney before this one, which included titles like Tangled and The Princess and the Frog, seemed to be turning back towards the days of the Renaissance, focusing less on pop culture references and more on good story, characters, and music.
Now, when I watched Frozen, I watched it with a little bit of trepidation, mainly because I was expecting it to be more of the same stuff that Disney had been putting out in the last couple of years. Boy, was I wrong.
Watching this movie made me feel almost like a little kid again. It felt like what I remember Disney movies to feel like. Engrossing stories with memorable characters and fantastic music, beautiful animation, and a story with a great mix of comedy and drama. It all seemed to be there, just as if it never changed, as if the mistakes of the past had never happened. Like we wish they hadn't.
But it's not just the general feel of the movie that gets at the number 10 spot.
I mentioned that the characters were memorable, and I wasn't lying. It probably goes without saying that Elsa is my favorite character, and for good reason. We see her go through a childhood full of isolation and fear, and we see how that affects her as an adult. Then we get to see her eventually overcome all that and have a chance at happiness. To me, Elsa is a great character for a number of reasons, so many in fact that I can't mention them all here. But needless to say, she, along with the rest of the cast, were a big push in my loving this film.
But it wouldn't be a Disney movie without music, right?
Frozen has a wonderful score that I would be remiss to ignore. Between the main score composed by Christoph Beck and the more popular songs composed by Kristen Anderson-Lopez and Robert Lopez, there's something for everyone here. Obviously, everyone knows the popular songs such as Let It Go or For the First Time in Forever, especially the former, but is it any surprise why? The music is simply fantastic, and when performed by people such as Idina Menzel, who is a wonderful singer in her own right, who could ignore it, really?
Bottom line, Frozen felt like a return to form, a form that Disney hadn't had for quite a few years. It was a great story filled with great characters and wonderful music. It's a movie I love, and I will continue to love it for many years down the road.
Number 9. The Jungle Book.
The 19th entry into the Disney animated canon, Jungle Book is basically the Disney-fied version of the Rudyard Kipling tale of the same name. It tells the story of Mowgli, a young man who was raised by a pack of wolves in the jungles of India, who is assisted by characters such as Bagheera the Panther and Baloo the Bear, as well as coming across other characters such as King Louie the Orangutan, Kaa the Python, and the villainous Shere Khan the Tiger.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and guess that many of you are probably dumbfounded as to why I placed this and 8 other movies above Frozen.
That's because I like a lot of Disney movies. I was raised on Disney. So when it came time to make this list, I had a lot of hard choices to make. There were a lot of entries fighting for just the number 10 spot. So in the end, I had to bite the bullet and put Frozen in the number 10 spot. This is based mostly on time. As much of a good movie as Frozen is, and as much as I love it, it's still relatively new, and it's having to go up against basically a decade and a half worth of other Disney films. Sorry. Just remember, this is all opinion, so we're not going to have the same thoughts here.
Anyway, my reasons for liking Jungle Book are pretty simple. I'll be honest, it's not some groundbreaking work. It was the last film made by Disney while the man himself was still alive, and it really didn't do anything that made it stand out from the other films at the time. In this case, it's purely a matter of it being a fun, simple movie. It's a good story, with good characters, and great music. Me and my family often break out into the song I Wanna Be Like You all the time. And I loved how Shere Khan was done. He's just such an awesome character.
Really, this one boils down to characters and music.
The characters were all well written, except for Mowgli, who I always remembered as being kind of annoying. Easily my favorites were Shere Khan and Kaa. Kaa was a great comedy character, and his sequence in the movie had some funny sight gags and a great song.
Trust in me, just in me.
And then there's Shere Khan, a magnificent bastard if ever I saw one. Yeah, he was a bad guy, so you should watch your step. That was his whole angle, and it was a great one. I should also mention the song sung by King Louie. As I said, me and my family break into the song almost all the time. It's just that fun of a song with its scatting and bebopping.
And I think that pretty much sums it up right there. It was a simple flick with good characters and great music, and sometimes that's all you really need. But from here on out, it's going to get really good, so prepare yourselves. Let's move on with the countdown.
Number 8. Atlantis, The Lost Empire.
This is one of those movies some would call a guilty pleasure. For me, it's just a pleasure.
Now I'm gonna go ahead and get some of the bad out of the way. Yes, the villain is too one-dimensional, and yes, the movie is a little too dark for a Disney film, but for me at least, these aren't deal breakers. Anyway, what's there to love about this movie? While some people disagree, I thought the art design for the film fit, especially when it comes to the scenery, and sometimes the people. And speaking of the people, I love these characters. Normally in Disney films, the side characters that are supposed to be comic relief don't work as such, and tend to drag the film down. Boy, do they tend to drag the films down. But in this case, it was the opposite. The side characters had funny, memorable lines, and were themselves well written, the only exception being the big bad, who just wanted money.
I think, in this case, the reason the movie didn't do so well is because people didn't really know what to do with it.
It says it's a Disney movie, but it's much darker, with people dying and a lot more action. I have a feeling that if this movie had been made by almost anyone else, it would have done better. In fact, it's not too much of a stretch to see this as a Don Bluth movie. But that doesn't change the fact that this change in tone probably confused a lot of people, hence the low appreciation for it.
However, despite all that, the film does have a fan base, which isn't surprising. For all its faults, and there are a few, Atlantis the Lost Empire is still a good movie. And if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you go and watch it. Who knows, you may find yourself with a new favorite.
Number 7. The Rescuers Down Under. Holy crap, this movie doesn't have anywhere near the amount of respect and love it deserves. Okay, little backstory. Back in 1977, Disney released a movie titled The Rescuers, about a secret society of mice dedicated to helping people. Stay with me on this, folks. The movie focused on 2 particular mice, Bernard and Miss Bianca, who are sent to the bayou to help rescue an orphan girl who's been kidnapped and forced to search for a jewel by a horrible woman named Madame Medusa. The movie was a great success, and was touted as a film that would begin a new age of animation. Whoops, called that a little too early. In fact, The Rescuers would be the last significant Disney film until 1989, when a movie called The Little Mermaid would be released. But we'll talk about that later.
Now this is an interesting case, because Disney didn't make any sequels to any of their animated films, and when they did start doing it regularly, it was one of the things that led to the downfall of the Renaissance. But The Rescuers was the first movie to ever get a sequel, and it was actually really good.
In fact, many consider the sequel to be far superior to the original in many ways. Released in 1990 as the second Disney film during the Renaissance, The Rescuers Down Under sees Bernard and Miss Bianca traveling to the Australian outback to rescue a little boy who's been kidnapped by a poacher who wants to hunt down a rare eagle that only the boy knows the location of. From there, it's a race against time to save both the boy and the eagle.
Now, where do I start with this movie? How about the animation?
Like I said, this was the second Disney film to be released during the Renaissance, and it shows. The animation is simply stunning, and the way that the Outback is represented here is nothing but spectacular. It's especially noticeable in sequences like this. I mean, just look at this! You can't look at that scene and tell me it isn't beautiful. I don't care who you are. And then on top of all that is the music. The whole film is filled with wonderful songs, but the piece from that scene is perhaps the clincher. It's just such a wonderful song that really makes you feel like flying. Is it really any wonder why this shot was used in the trailer? And is it any wonder why this movie is in the number 7 spot? Number 6. Mulan. Mulan came out when the Renaissance was on the wane. In fact, the next movie to be released would be Tarzan, which is generally considered to be the final Disney movie of the Renaissance. So naturally, the movies were starting to get a little stale by this point, and the tropes that we now so firmly associate with Disney were in place and already being mocked. I'd like to say that Mulan was a nice diversion from that, but it wasn't. Mulan suffered from a lot of the same problems that were afflicting the other films. Predictable songs, bad comedic characters that just didn't fit, and an art style that was meh. But Mulan had one thing that more than made up for all that, and that was Mulan herself. True, she had her own problems as a character, like the cliché wanting more gimmick, but she was still an awesome character. Unlike the Disney princesses, which she's a part of even though she's not actually a princess, Mulan was not afraid to kick ass if ass needed kicking.
Now, before you get on to me about how there are other strong women in the Disney princess lineup, think about this for a second.
Prior to Mulan, there were 3 other Disney princesses who could be called strong: Belle, Jasmine, and Pocahontas. Now, which of the 4 I just mentioned went to war? Aha! We have a winner! And while it's true that more strong princesses have been added since then, Mulan was still the first who could rightfully be called an ass kicker. And that reason by itself is enough to make this my 6th favorite Disney movie.
What about the other characters? Meh. What about the art? It was interesting, but nothing all that groundbreaking. What about the music? Folks, let's face it, there was only one song anyone remembers from this whole movie. Let's get down to business! To aha! You thought I was gonna be singing, didn't you? Thought I might have a lineup of cameos of other people singing. Well, you expect too much of me. However, I will show you a clip of Jackie Chan singing it. Enjoy! That's actually pretty badass. Bravo, Jackie Chan! Bravo!
Yeah, as far as the music goes, with the exception of I'll Make a Man Out of You and Reflection, it's all pretty unremarkable. These 2 songs are great, but that's about it from the soundtrack. But altogether, it's more than enough to earn it the number 6 spot.
Stay tuned. Judge of Character will be right back. Welcome back to Judge of Character.
Number 5. Aladdin.
Now we're really getting into the classics.
I think just about everyone knows this movie and what it's about, so you'll forgive me if I don't explain the plot and just get right into it. If you actually don't know the story of this movie, then either Google it, or better yet, watch it for yourself. Anyway, a lot of what makes this one of my favorites is the content. There's action, there's comedy, there's romance, there's all sorts of great things in this movie. With the action, you've got sword fights, lava chases, and even the heroes fighting an evil genie. For the comedy, it's the late Robin Williams voicing Genie, so of course it's gonna be friggin' hilarious. And for the romance, you have 2 characters that are obviously in love, and it's believable. And ironically, they also happen to be, for me at least, the weakest point in the whole movie.
Go ahead. Start writing your multi-part dissertations about why I'm wrong. I'll wait. No, I won't.
Honestly, I never really saw both Aladdin or Jasmine as memorable characters. Sure, they're well written and they have chemistry, but, well, they're just not my favorite characters. They're kind of bleh to me. I think some of this has to do with my age. I imagine when I was younger they were alright, but as I've gotten older and as I've made character analysis my main thing, the more I look at them, the less I think of them. They're not bad characters, but they're not what made the movie for me. What did was the action, comedy, and the songs. At least with the songs, the two do good with A Whole New World, but that was about it. For me, it was all about Genie and his humor, which is also why I now get really sad when I think about this movie.
But that's just me, and that's the only thing that I feel is holding this movie back from being as good of a movie as it could have been, at least in my opinion. But hey, that's what opinions are all about. You may not agree with me, but that's just how it is. Anyway, let's move on, shall we?
Number 4. Fantasia. If you don't think this movie is amazing, you are either too young to know it, or something is seriously wrong in your head place. Or you just have different tastes than me. In any case, Fantasia is a phenomenal movie, blending classical music with simply stunning animation.
There's a little history to this movie, folks, and it's actually pretty interesting. You see, it was originally conceived as a vehicle for Mickey Mouse in order to help improve his then waning popularity, and it all centered around the short that we know today as The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
But as production costs grew for the short, it was instead decided to include it in a feature film that consisted of other animated shorts that were set to pieces of classical music, including works such as The Nutcracker Suite, Toccata and Fugue in D minor, and of course, Night on Bald Mountain.
There's so much I could say about this movie, but the best way to describe it is that it's an experience. When you watch this movie, you're not just watching animation and listening to music, you're experiencing something. It's something you go through.
There is no story in Fantasia. It's all about experiencing these pieces of music in a way you may never have before. Sometimes it's in an abstract form, like with the toccata, while sometimes there is some form of a narrative. But throughout it all, it's an experience. When I saw this as a kid, I didn't really understand it, and that was actually a good thing. I could just sit there and enjoy the beautiful animation while listening to the hauntingly good music. In fact, I attribute my enjoyment of classical music to this movie.
Now, this was actually meant to be part of a regular film series where they'd go back and make another one every couple of years. But the first movie didn't make anywhere near enough money to justify all the time and effort that went into it, so for the longest time, we were only left with one Fantasia. Then in 1999, they released Fantasia 2000. And suddenly we all wished there was only one Fantasia.
The problem with the sequel was that it just couldn't catch the simplicity that made the original as great as it was. Fantasia was lightning in a bottle, and no one will ever manage to catch it again.
But what of the other 3 spots on my list? Well, why wait? Let's keep going!
Number 3. The Little Mermaid.
Here we go, kids. The movie that essentially single-handedly kick-started the animation renaissance for Disney.
Let me paint a picture of the time. Most animation on TV was merchandise-driven and relied on limited animation. Disney was almost destroyed when the movie The Black Cauldron failed to score at the box office. Things were dire, and it seemed like animation would be forever seen as an entertainment meant only for children. Then, along came a man named Don Bluth, who arrived with a little movie called The Secret of Nim.
It's beautiful!
You might remember my discussing this movie back in the episode on Mrs. Brisby, the main character of the film. And like I said in that episode, it was this movie that more or less started the Renaissance age of animation. With the success of Nim, Disney was forced to take a good look at its own works and step up to the challenge. And what did we get as a result? Oliver and Company. But that was soon followed by Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and we all remember how great that movie was.
After the release of Roger Rabbit, Disney followed that up with Little Mermaid in 1989, and Disney's part in the Renaissance truly began.
What can I say about this movie that hasn't already been picked apart and discussed by others better than myself? Much like how Frozen was a return to the Renaissance films, Little Mermaid was a return to the golden age of Disney, to movies like Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. It had everything we always associated and always will associate with Disney. Great animation, fantastic music, and funny comedy. This was before the whole talking animal sidekick thing was done to death, when it was still fresh, so we loved the characters of Sebastian and Flounder. The animation was top-notch and still looks gorgeous today. And of course, there's the music. Everyone knows Under the Sea, and everyone can sing it without even thinking about it. I mean, come on, it's Alan Menken. Would you expect anything less? But, as much as I love this movie, I do have one major problem with it.
Ariel. Let it out. I know.
Hear me out, everyone. When you really sit down and take a closer look, Ariel's a weak character. She's just a whiny 16-year-old. And while this isn't far removed from characters like Snow White, who had even less development, it's a little more jarring here. Unlike later princesses, Ariel doesn't do anything to reach her goals, at least nothing good. The one thing she does is basically sell her voice to a sea witch. Yeah, really thought that one through, eh, Ariel? And even worse, in the end, she still gets what she wants. Has she learned anything from all this? Has she grown as a character? Has she gone through any development? I doubt it. Maybe, just maybe, she realizes that all the bad shit that happened was her fault. But I highly doubt it.
But even with her being as weak of a character as she was, I still think highly of this movie.
The Little Mermaid is still a classic movie, one that should be in anyone's collection. And if you haven't seen it, what the hell's wrong with you? Number 2. Beauty and the Beast.
Come on, like I wouldn't talk about this movie.
While it's not my number 1 pick, I can't help but feel like Beauty and the Beast is the perfect Disney movie. It encapsulates everything we think of when we think of Disney. The fairy tale story, the happily ever after, the beautiful animation, wonderful characters, and fantastic music. Everything is just spot on. And it's the only Disney movie I don't have any particular problem with.
So why is it number 1? It's personal taste here, folks. Sorry, not everyone's gonna agree with my number 1 choice. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Beauty and the Beast here, so let's focus, shall we?
Do I really need to explain what this movie is about? I'm pretty sure just about everyone, even the uninitiated, know the story. So let's talk about everything else. The music, top notch. It plucks on your emotions at just the right times. The animation, just look at it! Isn't that gorgeous? Really, what sells it for me is, what else? The characters. I love Belle. She is nothing short of awesome. How she acts, her personality, everything about her is great. But perhaps the best part about her, as well as the Beast, is how they fall in love.
Unlike a lot of other Disney movies, this was not love at first sight. True, that trope isn't present in every single Disney movie, but it's present in enough of them that we always seem to tie the two together, Disney and love at first sight. But in this case, it's absolutely not true. They have to work for their love. This is no 3-day romance here, folks. This took some time. Days, weeks, possibly even months. It works. It's a much more accurate portrayal of love. And for that, it's one of the many reasons it's a good movie.
I admit fully that I'm a hopeless romantic. I'm all about love. And this movie just gets me right in the heartstrings. The whole idea of true love is one I can get behind 100%.
That love, true love.
You know, I'd normally have a snarky remark to that, but Princess Bride was a great movie, so I'll allow it.
There's not much else to say here other than Beauty and the Beast is perfect.
So what could have possibly beat the perfect Disney movie for my number 1 pick? How about a story you would have never pegged as being a Disney movie?
Number 1. The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Alright everyone, take a moment to digest this. The Hunchback of Notre Dame beat out Beauty and the Beast for my number 1 spot. You can start speculating on the state of my sanity, which admittedly is already pretty questionable.
Yeah, I know, I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this one, but I promise I can explain myself. Whereas movies like Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid were the kind of stories you'd expect from Disney, Hunchback of Notre Dame was way out of left field. I mean, the original story had all sorts of things you would never expect from Disney, and the film still had a few things you wouldn't expect from Disney. A dirty old priest who lusts after a gypsy and then threatens to kill her when she doesn't want him? Attempted infanticide? The main character not getting the girl? Okay, that last one's not so bad, but it was still rather uncommon in Disney.
Okay, but why is this better than Beauty and the Beast?
Once again, this is all personal opinion. If you disagree, fine. Hunchback is my favorite for a lot of reasons, many similar to what I've already discussed with all of the other entries. So I'm going to discuss the three big ones: animation, characters, and music. First off, the animation. Hunchback does not have the best animation, but what it has is great. The colors specifically are what really makes it great for me. I love the palette of this movie, especially for Notre Dame itself. Watching this movie and seeing those scenes that feature the cathedral, it feels like the cathedral is a character itself, which it actually is, especially in the original novel.
And this leads me to point number 2, the characters.
Okay, there's really only one character I want to talk about, but I'll talk about the others first. Phoebus, I don't like. Which is funny, because here he's meant to be a likable character, while in the original story he's an asshole who actually has little to no redeeming qualities. I don't like him here because he's a bland character. He's just there for Esmeralda to pair up with. As for Esmeralda, I like her okay, but she's definitely not my favorite Disney heroine. Then there's Quasimodo, the hero and titular hunchback. He's okay. He's a pretty basic character. He wants more out of life, he wants to be accepted and loved. And that's about it. There is the fact that he doesn't end up with Esmeralda, which was pretty innovative at the time for Disney, and it does make for a heartbreaking moment where we hear the haunting reprise of Heaven's Light, only now it's sung with a tragic feeling.
No face as hideous as my face was ever meant for heaven's light.
My heart!
But let's not beat around the bush here, people. We all want to hear about Frollo.
Yes, this is the character everyone remembers from Hunchback. Judge Claude Frollo, the villain. And why not? Of all the villains that Disney has produced over the years, Frollo is a special brand of evil. He's the kind who genuinely believes that what he's doing is right. He kills innocent women and children, and does it all while invoking the name of God. And then there's that matter of lust. Frollo falls for Esmeralda and decides that if he can't have her, no one will. Which leads us to the most memorable villain song ever.
Hellfire is perhaps one of the most remembered and loved villain songs, right up there with Poor Unfortunate Souls or Be Prepared. But whereas those songs were somewhat upbeat and preppy despite the subject matter, Hellfire is extremely dark and somewhat troubling.
The whole sequence, both animation and music, is stunning. Frollo is pouring his heart out and the conflict he feels. He wants to be an upstanding religious man, but he's being tempted by his most base instincts. The song is both a plea to heaven for strength as well as a declaration of evil intent. And it's just so haunting, especially at the end when Frollo begs God to have mercy on him.
This, of course, leads me to the music.
Once again, Alan Menken, who crafted most of our favorite Disney songs growing up, gives a brilliant score. The main songs, which include Out There and Hellfire, of course, are fantastic. And while they may not be as memorable as, say, Hakuna Matata, they do impact you when you listen to them. Then there's the rest of the soundtrack, which is filled with pieces like this.
Did anybody else just orgasm? Just me? Cool.
The music in this movie is brilliant. Not just the music, but the lyrics too. That's Latin you hear being chanted, and if you understand it like me, or if you have Google Translate, what you're hearing are basically famous prayers, like Kyrie eleison, which is actually Greek, and Dies Irae. On top of that, there are many instances where the lyrics actually match what's happening on screen. Hell, the piece titled Sanctuary basically is one whole element of that.
But perhaps what makes me a fan of the movie is the whole plot itself.
Hunchback is not a fairy tale, and while the ending is Disney-fied, it does not end with happily ever after, at least not the way you think. The story is more complex than just two people falling in love and having to overcome obstacles to be together. It's about finding acceptance, it's about religion, it's all sorts of things rolled into one. I didn't get it the first go-around, but when I saw it again as an adult, I saw it for the good movie it was. Does it have flaws? God, yes, and those do impact it. But it's still my favorite, and it's going to be for a long time.
And that's it. My top 10 personal favorite Disney movies. Now obviously not everyone's going to agree with me, and that's fine. That's the whole point of having an opinion. If you do disagree, then by all means leave a comment saying what you would have picked and why. I always love to see those kind of responses. In any case, I'm your host Steve, reminding all of you to stay in character.
Ha 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 ha!